Derek Walsh never returned. Word was he'd tried other bars, but his reputation had preceded him. Turns out people don't like customers who disrespect combat veterans. The lesson of Frank Morrison's story isn't complicated. Before you judge someone as too slow, too old, too much trouble, before you decide they're not worth your patience, maybe ask yourself what they might have done when it mattered most. Because sometimes the slow hands pouring your drink once moved fast enough to save lives. Sometimes the old man behind the counter was once young enough to bleed for strangers. And sometimes the person you're dismissing as a burden once carried burdens you can't imagine. Frank Morrison never asked for special treatment. He never demanded recognition for his service. He just wanted to do honest work and be treated with basic human dignity. But once people learned his story, dignity wasn't enough. He deserved honor. He deserved respect. He deserved to be remembered not for how slowly he moved in his old age, but for how bravely he moved when it counted. So I ask you, have you ever misjudged someone based on their limitations, only to discover their true strength later? Share their story in the comments. Say their name. Because at the Human Stories, we believe that every Purple Heart carries a story worth hearing. Thank you for watching. Subscribe, share, and help us honor the people who served in silence then and now. Until next time, before you complain about slow service, remember, those hands might once have saved lives. They fired the old bartender until they found his Purple Heart. Can we get someone faster? This guy's taking forever. The customer tapped his fingers impatiently as the elderly bartender moved slowly behind the bar. What he didn't know was that those slow hands had once performed emergency surgery on a battlefield, and by the end of the night, everyone would know it. Welcome to True Human Tales. Before we continue this powerful story of judgment, service, and redemption, tell me in the comments, from which city in the world are you watching this video today? And if you believe stories like this deserve to be heard, hit that subscribe button. We're building a community that honors the ones who served in silence. Murphy's Bar sat on the corner of 5th and Main, a working-class establishment with dark wood worn smooth by decades of use. Behind the bar, moving with deliberate slowness, was a man most customers called Pops. Frank Morrison was 68 years old and had been working there for 3 years since his wife passed. Frank wasn't fast. His hands shook slightly, his hearing wasn't perfect, and his left leg was stiff from an old injury he never discussed. But he was reliable. He showed up for every shift, never complained, and treated every customer with quiet courtesy. The owner, Danny Murphy, tolerated Frank's slowness because he was honest and dependable. But tolerance was wearing thin, especially on busy Friday nights like this one. The bar was packed, every stool was occupied, and people stood too deep waiting for drinks. The usual Friday crowd filled the space, construction workers still in dust-covered clothes, office workers loosening their ties, college students trying to look older than they were. Frank was working alone. The younger bartender had called in sick, leaving him to handle the Friday rush by himself. It was management's mistake putting one elderly man against this crowd. "Come on, old man, I've been waiting 10 minutes for a beer," one customer called out, waving a $20 bill impatiently. Frank nodded apologetically, continuing his methodical work. He was preparing a complicated cocktail order: muddle the mint, add the rum, measure the simple syrup. Each step took time, and the line of frustrated customers grew longer. That's when Derek Walsh walked in. A regular customer, but not the kind bars appreciated. Loud, demanding, treating service workers like they were beneath him. He worked in car sales and made sure everyone knew his supposed importance. He pushed to the front, ignoring people who'd been waiting longer. "Whiskey sour, and make it fast. I don't have all night." Frank looked up from his current order. "I'll be right with you, sir." "Just finishing this drink." Derek surveyed the chaos: waiting customers, empty glasses accumulating on tables, one old man clearly overwhelmed trying to do the work of 2 people. "Are you kidding me? Can we get someone faster? This guy's taking forever." The bar gradually quieted. Even the background music seemed softer. People turned to watch the confrontation brewing. "Look, Pops," Derek continued, his voice getting louder for maximum effect. "I don't know who hired you, but this is a bar, not a nursing home. People want fast service, not some old guy who can barely move. Frank finished the cocktail he'd been assembling, set it carefully in front of the customer who'd ordered it, then turned to Derek with calm dignity. "What can I get you, sir?" "I already told you, whiskey sour, and try to make it before I die of old age." Frank nodded and began preparing the drink with his usual methodical precision, but Derek wasn't finished making his point. "Danny!" he called toward the back office. "Danny Murphy! You need to see what's happening to your business." Danny Murphy emerged from his office looking stressed and harried. At 40, he was a thin man with thinning hair and the perpetually worried expression of someone trying to keep a struggling business afloat in a tough economy. "What's the problem, Derek?" he asked, though he could already assess the situation: the crowd of waiting customers, the overwhelmed bartender, the obvious bottleneck. "The problem is, you've got Grandpa Moses here trying to serve drinks like he's performing surgery." "I've been waiting 15 minutes for a simple whiskey sour." "3 minutes," Frank corrected quietly, still working on Derek's drink with careful precision. "Don't correct me, old man," Derek snapped, his face reddening. "This is ridiculous. You're hurting business with this charity case." Frank set the perfect whiskey sour in front of Derek, properly balanced, beautifully presented with a maraschino cherry and orange slice. Derek took a sip, grudgingly admitted it was excellent, but continued his complaint. "Danny, I've been coming here 5 years. I bring clients here regularly. I spend serious money. But if this is the kind of service you're offering—" He let the threat hang heavy in the air. Danny felt the familiar pressure weighing on his shoulders. The bar was struggling financially, had been for months. He couldn't afford to lose regular customers, especially ones who claimed to spend as much as Derek did. But Frank had been a reliable employee. Honest, dependable, never caused trouble. "Frank, why don't you take a break? I'll handle things for a while." Frank looked at him for a moment, understanding what was really being communicated. This wasn't about taking a rest. "I can handle it, Danny. It's just particularly busy tonight. Just take a break. We'll talk later." Frank untied his apron slowly, hung it carefully on the hook behind the bar, and walked toward the back room with measured steps. As he passed Derek, "Nothing personal, Pops. It's just business. Maybe try the library. I hear they like things slow there." A few customers laughed. Not many, but enough to sting. Frank kept walking, his damaged leg making each step deliberate until he disappeared through the employee door. Frank sat on the wooden chair next to his locker, staring at his shaking hands. He'd faced worse than Derek Walsh, but this felt different, more personal. He opened his locker and gathered his belongings: thermos, reading glasses, worn paperback. At the bottom, wrapped in old cloth, was a small velvet box he'd carried for 50 years. As he stood to leave, the box caught on his pocket and fell to the floor, popping open as it hit concrete. The Purple Heart medal rolled across the floor, stopping at Danny Murphy's feet. Danny stared at the medal before picking it up. It was real, heavy, tarnished with age, but unmistakably authentic. "Frank?" Danny's voice was barely a whisper. Frank looked up, saw Danny holding the medal, and closed his eyes briefly. "You weren't supposed to see that." "Frank, what is this?" Frank took the medal back, looked at it, then carefully placed it in the box. Nothing important, just an old piece of metal. But Danny had seen the engraving: SGT, Frank Morrison, USARMY, VIETNAM, 1971. "Frank, this is a Purple Heart. You're a veteran. I was a lot of things. Right now, I'm just an old man who's too slow to pour drinks." He started to leave, but Danny caught his arm gently. "Wait, please, tell me about this." Frank looked at him for a long moment. "Danny, you've got a business to run. You don't need some old soldiers' war stories." "Maybe I do. Maybe we all do." They sat in Danny's office. Frank held the Purple Heart, turning it slowly. "I was a medic. 68th Medical Detachment, attached to the 1st Infantry Division. We provided medical support near Ku Chai." Danny listened without interrupting. "April 15th, 1971. We were treating casualties from an ambush when we started taking mortars. One round hit close to my aid station. Shrapnel tore up my left leg, but I had 6 wounded men who couldn't move." Frank's voice was matter-of-fact. "Took me 3 hours to stabilize them for evacuation. By the time the helicopters arrived, I'd lost enough blood that I passed out during handoff." Danny stared. "You saved 6 men while wounded?" "I did my job. Same as any medic would. Why didn't you tell anyone? Frank smiled sadly. Who was I going to tell? Derek Walsh? What would I say? Hi, I used to save lives, now can I get you a beer? He put the medal away. That was 50 years ago. Different person, different life. Now I'm just an old man with shaky hands who moves too slow. That's not true, isn't it? Derek was right. I am slow. You do have a business to run. Frank stood carefully. It's okay, Danny. This place gave me somewhere to go after Margaret died. I'm grateful, but maybe it's time to find something more suited to an old, slow medic. After Frank left, Danny sat alone, holding the Purple Heart and thinking. He thought about Derek's demands for fast service, about his grandfather, who built this bar as a place where working people found dignity, about Frank Morrison, who had bled for his country and was now dismissed as too slow. Finally, he walked back into the bar. Derek was still there, probably telling people how he'd gotten the old bartender fired. Danny picked up the microphone. Excuse me, folks. If I could have your attention. The bar quieted. Earlier tonight, one of our employees was criticized for being too slow. Some felt his service wasn't up to standards. Derek raised his glass mockingly. Damn right. Danny looked directly at him. Derek? That man you complained about? Frank Morrison. He's 68, moves slowly because he was wounded in Vietnam, saving 6 American soldiers' lives. Complete silence. He was awarded the Purple Heart. For 3 years, he's worked here 6 days a week, never complaining, never asking for special treatment. Danny's voice strengthened. Frank will be back tomorrow and every night after. If anyone has a problem with how fast he serves drinks, you're welcome to go elsewhere. He looked around the room. This is Murphy's Bar. My grandfather built this as a place where working people could be treated with dignity. If you can't treat a combat veteran with respect, you don't belong here. Derek stood up, red-faced. You're choosing some old cripple over paying customers? The bar erupted. 2 construction workers grabbed Derek's arms. Get out, one growled. Now. You don't disrespect a veteran like that, an older woman called out. Derek found himself surrounded by angry faces. He threw money on the bar and headed for the door. As he left, spontaneous applause broke out. The next evening, Frank arrived uncertain what to expect. Danny had called asking him to come in but hadn't explained what happened. As he walked through the door, everything felt different. The first thing he noticed was the new sign, Morrison's Corner, in honor of our veterans. The second was that every customer was looking at him. Then they started clapping. Frank stood frozen as the entire bar gave him a standing ovation. Danny appeared beside him. Frank, meet Margaret Chen, Vietnam veteran, served as a nurse. She wanted to thank you. An elderly Asian woman saluted him. Welcome home, soldier. And Robert Martinez. His father served with the 1st Infantry Division, same unit as yours. A middle-aged man shook Frank's hand firmly. My dad never made it home, but he might have if he'd had a medic like you. One by one, people introduced themselves, veterans from different wars, children of veterans, people who just wanted to say thank you. You did all this for me? Frank asked quietly. I did what my grandfather would have done, Danny replied, what anyone should do for someone who served. In the weeks that followed, Morrison's Corner became something special. Frank still moved slowly, hands still shook, legs still made walking difficult. But nobody complained. Instead, customers waited patiently, often talking with Frank about their own military service or family members who had served. The bar started hosting weekly Veterans Night, where former service members shared stories and connected with others who understood their experiences. Frank became not just a bartender, but a counselor, friend, and living reminder of sacrifice and service. The Purple Heart was now displayed behind the bar, along with a Vietnam photograph showing a young medic treating wounded soldiers. One evening, a young man approached hesitantly. Are you Frank Morrison? My grandfather was Timothy Chen. He served with you in Vietnam. Frank's hands went still. Tommy Chen? From Brooklyn? Yes, sir. Before he died, he told me about a medic who saved his life near Cu Chi. He said if I ever met Frank Morrison, I should tell him Tommy Chen never forgot. Frank's eyes filled with tears. They talked for an hour about Tommy Chen, about Vietnam, about memory and bonds between soldiers. When the young man left, he pressed a photograph into Frank's hand. his grandfather in uniform, with a note. For Frank Morrison, who brought me home, T. Chen. Frank Morrison worked at Morrison's Corner until he was 75. When he finally retired, the entire neighborhood threw him a party that lasted until dawn. The bar still operates today, still honoring veterans, still treating every customer with the dignity Frank exemplified. Frank Morrison continued working at Morrison's Corner until he was 75 years old. When he finally retired, the entire neighborhood threw him a party that lasted until dawn. The bar still operates today, still honoring veterans, still treating every customer with the dignity and respect that Frank exemplified. Derek Walsh never came back. Word was he'd tried several other bars in town, but somehow his reputation had preceded him. Turns out people don't like customers who disrespect combat veterans. The lesson of Frank Morrison's story isn't complicated. Before you judge someone as too slow, too old, too much trouble, before you decide they're not worth your time or patience, maybe ask yourself what they might have done when it mattered most. Because sometimes the slow hands pouring your drink once moved fast enough to save lives. Sometimes the old man behind the counter was once young enough to bleed for strangers. And sometimes the person you're dismissing as a burden once carried burdens you can't imagine. Frank Morrison never asked for special treatment. He never demanded recognition for his service. He just wanted to do honest work and be treated with basic human dignity. But once people learned his story, dignity wasn't enough. He deserved honor. He deserved respect. He deserved to be remembered not for how slowly he moved in his old age, but for how bravely he moved when it counted. So I ask you, have you ever misjudged someone based on their limitations only to discover their true strength later? Share their story in the comments. Say their name, because at True Human Tales, we believe that every Purple Heart carries a story worth hearing. Thank you for watching. Subscribe, share, and help us honor the people who served in silence then and now. Until next time, before you complain about slow service, remember, those hands might once have saved lives.